The Suikoden series is full of betrayal and heartbreak. I recently made a video discussing Sayoli's betrayal in Suikoden 5 and how some people didn't understand or misunderstood her reasoning. And this time I want to talk about a different betrayal. The betrayal that hurt people the most. Jowy's betrayal in Suikoden II. Over 25 years after the game's release, and there are still people who don't understand Jowy's motivation or reasoning for doing what he did. There are still people who blame Jowy for continuing the war by not signing the peace agreement. And now with the release of the HD remaster, there are new fans of the series who are left with the same confusion as to the reasoning of Jowy's betrayal and why he continued the war after Luca's death. To some extent, I can't fault them for not fully understanding, as some of the history about Highland and the city-states comes from supplemental material and encyclopedias that only released in Japan. And the scene between Jowy and Luca that adds some context only appears in Suikoden Volume 1, a visual novel which also only released in Japan. But at the same time, Suikoden II provides more than enough context by itself to explain Jowy's actions and reasons, and if you actually pay attention to the story, his reasons and motives are abundantly clear. So similarly to the Sayoli's betrayal video, to properly explain the reasons for Jowy's betrayal and his actions throughout the war, to explain why the people of each nation hate each other so much and why any peace agreement will never hold, we need to go back in time and explain the history between the Highland Kingdom and the city-states of Jowston. I'm only going to give a quick run over the information here. If you want a more in-depth look at the history of each nation, check out my History of Dunan video, which you can find in the description. The Highland Kingdom was established in the year 237, which is 223 years before the events of Suikoden II. The land was gifted to Morrow Blight as a reward for ending a civil war within Harmonia. As a small nation with a smaller population than their neighbours, the king deemed it necessary to maintain a strong military with a focus on meritocracy. This would lead to the military holding much influence within the kingdom, and this bit of information is very important for later. With Harmonia bordering their north and the ocean to their east, Highland's only option for expansion was to the west and to the south into the lands of Dunan. The conflicts between Highland and the city-states dates back to the year 252 when the Highland Kingdom took advantage of the civil war within the Dunan monarchy by invading and occupying the territories of Eastern South Window. The Dunan monarchy collapsed and the South Window Principality was established. The Muse Principality, who used to be part of the Dunan monarchy, would attack the Highland forces stationed in Eastern South Window, successfully pushing the Highland forces from the land and claiming it for themselves. This territory would then be referred to as Eastern Muse. With Muse now bordering Highland to their west and south, tensions would rise between the two and frequent skirmishes and battles would take place. In the year 280, Muse would finance the establishment of a knightly order known as the Matilda Knights, who were intended to act as a defence force against the constant threat of invasion from Highland. 14 years later, in the year 294, the Matilda Knightdom would be granted independence from Muse. 20 years later, in the year 314, to counter the ever-growing threats of their neighbours, the Highland Kingdom to the north and the Scarlet Moon Empire to the south, the principalities of Muse, South Window and Two River, along with the Matilda Knights, would enter into an alliance known as the City-States of Jowston. Over the next 100 years, there would be many more skirmishes, battles and wars between the Highland Kingdom and the City-States of Jowston. In the year 428, King Robert Blight would order the Highland army to launch a large-scale invasion of the City-States, which was led by Han Cunningham, who bore the Black Sword rune, which represents half of the Rune of Beginning. Han and the Highland forces swiftly captured over half of the city-state's territory. The city-state's forces would engage in guerrilla warfare against the Highland army until a man called Genkaku, a childhood friend of Han's, and the bearer of the Bright Shield rune, the other half of the Rune of Beginning, would launch a successful counter-offensive and push the Highland army out of state lands. The reason I mention the Black Sword and Bright Shield runes is because they're important too. These runes represent the struggle between sword and shield in the Suikoden creation myth, and the bearers of these two runes are destined to come into conflict with one another, with the victor uniting the runes to form the Rune of Beginning. Han and Genkaku would resist the rune's will and seal their runes away, and with the death of King Robert, his son Ageres would take the throne. Ageres' blight was unlike his predecessors. He was a pacifist who desired peace, and Han and Genkaku would push for a ceasefire between the two nations. The fragile peace would hold for the next 26 years, however, frequent small-scale conflicts would still take place through the form of covert attacks and espionage. Then comes the events of Suikoden II, which takes place in the year 460. Remember earlier when I said that the Highland Kingdom is a military-focused meritocracy and that the military hold much influence within the kingdom and that this bit of information was important? I'm about to explain why. The Highland army had grown increasingly unhappy with Ageres Blight's pacifism and his desire for peace with the city-states. His rule would be undermined by the military, and just before the events of Suikoden II, they would demand that his son Luca be given command of the army instead. The nation was so heavily military-focused that they even had youth brigades for training children to prepare them for military service. The best way to advance your status and that of your families in Highland was through distinguished military service, and you can't do that during times of peace. The two nations have been involved in countless conflicts and wars, and for the entire 237-year existence of the Highland Kingdom, they've been trying to invade and expand into Dunan lands. Because of how the Highland Kingdom is set up, because of the way their society is and how its people are raised, peace was never an option. Suikoden II begins with Luca Blight and his White Wolf army massacring the Unicorn Brigade, which was a youth division of the Highland Army. Luca would then pin the blame for this attack on the city-states as part of his plot to start a new war with the city-states. Jowy and Ryu were part of this brigade and survived the attack by leaping off a cliff into a river. The two would wash ashore in the city-states where they would inherit the Black Sword and Bright Shield runes. Earlier I said those two runes were important too, as the bearers of these runes are destined by the rune's will to come into conflict. Fast forward, Ryu and Jowy end up in Muse and are sent on a mission to infiltrate a Highland camp on the Muse-Highland border. Jowy was captured and brought before Luca. Luca would hand Jowy a knife and demand that he kill Annabelle, the mayor of Muse. As a way of persuading Jowy to go through with the assassination, Luca would threaten to have Jowy's family branded as traitors and executed. Jowy despised Luca for what he had done and for what he was, but he admired Luca's strength. Jowy would return to Muse, and after witnessing the infighting between the leaders of the city-states and how disunited they were, Jowy would feel that the Highland Kingdom was best suited to unite the land and end the conflict once and for all, which is what led to him assassinating Annabelle and opening the city gates to allow the Highland army to enter. The Highland Kingdom was largely unified under the banner of Luca Blight, while the city-states were an alliance of 5 city-states and a knightdom, all squabbling with each other and each with their own individual goals and interests. By the time of Suikoden II, the Matilda knightdom were led by a corrupt knight who would lord his weight around and disrespect the other member states, deriding Greenhill for suffering crop failures. Two River, who were far from the borders with Highland and Scarlet Moon, were tired of being dragged into wars they felt didn't concern them. Tensions were high between South Window and Tinto, who faced the brunt of the wars with the Scarlet Moon Empire to the south. The Tinto leadership were angry with what they deemed to be South Window's cowardice. The city-states were fractured and at odds with each other, but Highland was unified. After Luca's death, when Jowy married Gilia Blight and became King of Highland, the city-states were still a mess. Highland controlled Muse, Eastern Muse and Greenhill. The Matilda knightdom had isolated itself and sealed off their borders. Tinto shut their border to the city-states and had begun forming plans to invade the grasslands to their west. The Highland Kingdom still held the advantage. They had more territory, they had a larger army, and they were unified. It would make no sense from Highland's perspective to negotiate for peace and hand over all captured territory from the position of strength they were in. The city-states were in shambles and ripe for the picking. Even if Jowy did attempt to seek for peace, what makes you think that the military who undermined Ageres' attempts at peace wouldn't undermine Jowy's attempts at peace? Jowy, who wasn't even a Blight by birth and had only just married into the Blight family. Jowy was still very much beholden to the will of the military. We also can't forget that the people of Highland were enraged. They wanted blood. As far as they were concerned, the city-states ambushed and slaughtered a bunch of children. This is where some people ask, well, now that Ryu and Jowy are the leaders of their respective factions, as survivors of what really happened, couldn't they just come out and tell the truth? But by this point, the lie that Luca had spread had become the truth. Who were the people of Highland going to believe? The word of their dead prince who wanted to avenge the deaths of their children at the hands of their mortal enemies? Or the word of a traitor turned king and his best friend a traitor who has taken up arms against them? You can't wash away the hatred of over 200 years of conflict overnight. Too much blood has been shed by both sides, and the people of Highland wanted revenge. And with how the Highland military is set up, any peace sought would be temporary at best. Even 15 years later, during the events of Suikoden III, the commonly held belief is that the war was started by the city-states. Old Book Volume 7 states, in 460 solar calendar, an alliance of cities known as the City-States of Jowston broke a ceasefire agreement without warning and annihilated the Highland Youth Army. In response, Prince Luca Blight of Highland invaded Toto and Ryubei villages, spawning the Dunan Unification War. Luca's lie had become the truth. The two nations simply cannot coexist, and after witnessing the horrors and suffering of the war, Jowy wanted to unite the lands under one banner to ensure that never again would anyone have to suffer such pain. We also can't forget the will of the runes. The true runes are rumoured to manipulate events to force their bearers to live out the destiny the runes are associated with. The holders of the Black Sword and Bright Shield runes are destined by the rune's will to come into conflict with one another in order to unite them. While Ryu was resisting the rune's will, Jowy appeared to give in to the rune's will due to his desire to unify the lands, but also because he was jealous of Ryu. He was jealous that Ryu had a family who loved him. He was jealous that Ryu had friends who loved him. He was jealous of the purpose Ryu had. He was jealous of how many people believed in, followed, and respected Ryu. While this jealousy wasn't the main motivating factor for Jowy, it certainly added fuel to his fire and it made him more susceptible to the rune's will. Jowy wanted to be the hero who united the lands and brought peace. He wanted to be the one who was loved by the people. This isn't a Disney movie where everybody can magically forget their prejudice, their hatred, and their animosity just because one man is dead. Luca may have started the most recent war, but he was just a symptom of over 200 years of conflict between the two nations. Families of dead children aren't going to break bread with their enemies while they're still grieving. Survivors of slaughtered villages of innocent civilians aren't going to forgive the atrocities committed against them. Highland, a militaristic society built around war, isn't going to be satisfied with peace with their enemies. They want to conquer their enemies. The city-states, a fractured and broken alliance of squabbling cities, was eating itself alive from within and it was going down a dark path. Too much blood had been shed on both sides over hundreds of years for a peaceful, happy ending to be possible. I'm not here to say whether Jowy was right or wrong for betraying you. I'm just explaining the reasons why he done so. I'm explaining the history of the conflicts and why the nations can't coexist. But I will say that Jowy had the right idea that a unified land under one banner was the only chance at real, long-lasting peace. That's it for this video. What do you think about Jowy and his betrayal? Do you agree with him? Do you agree with his reasoning and his goals? Or do you disagree with him? Let me know your thoughts below. Thanks for watching and I'll catch you on the next video.